I've always known that our words and actions can either make or break someone. But in Zina's case, it was a matter of self-destruction and wrong affirmations. Yet, just as she stood on the bridge to end it all, a miracle happened. Hi, welcome to another episode on Folktale Bestie. Before we dive into this story, please tell us where you are watching from in the comments. Like and share so this story can change someone's life today. Now, let's get started. Zina's world was exactly 4 sizes too big. In the middle of a sweltering Tuesday, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror, pulling a charcoal gray, XXL hoodie over her head. It was thick, heavy, and swallowed her frame entirely. Over that, she wore a black maxi skirt that brushed the floor. To anyone else, the heat would be unbearable, but to Zina, the sweat was a small price to pay for the safety of being a shadow. Invisible, she whispered to her reflection. If they can't see the shape of me, they can't comment on it. She grabbed her sketchbook and tucked it under her arm like a shield. Zina was a brilliant artist. On paper, she was fearless. She drew women with vibrant skin and bold features, capturing emotions that she was too afraid to feel herself. But as soon as she stepped outside her apartment, that fearlessness evaporated. The local mall was her destination. She needed new charcoal pencils. The moment she entered the air-conditioned building, she felt the familiar prickle of anxiety. She kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the tiled floor, counting the squares as she walked. It didn't matter how much she hid, people still noticed. As she waited in line at the art supply store, she heard a muffled giggle behind her. She didn't have to look to know it was directed at her. Is she wearing a winter hoodie in this weather? A girl whispered. Maybe she's hiding a whole second person in there, a boy replied, followed by a sharp, barking laugh. Zina's face burned. She clutched her sketchbook tighter, her knuckles turning white. She bought her pencils as fast as she could and hurried toward the exit, but the mall felt like a gauntlet. Near the fountain, a group of teenagers was filming a dance video. As Zina tried to scurry past, one of them purposefully stepped into her path, forcing her to stop. "Whoa, big moves," the boy shouted, pointing his phone camera directly at her face. "Check out the tent. Hey, lady, give us a spin. Is there a circus under there?" The group erupted. Other shoppers stopped to watch, some with pitying eyes, others with smirks. Zina felt the weight of her body like it was made of lead. She didn't fight back. She didn't say a word. She just lowered her head until her chin hit her chest and pushed past them, her heavy sneakers thumping against the floor. By the time she reached the safety of her car, her breath was coming in ragged gasps. She threw her sketchbook onto the passenger seat and gripped the steering wheel. She looked at her hands, soft, capable, artistic hands, and hated them. She hated the fabric that protected her and the body it failed to hide. The fabric fortress was supposed to keep the world out, but all it really did was trap her inside with her own sadness. The engine of Zina's car was still clicking as it cooled, but her heart was racing much faster. She sat in her dark driveway, staring at her phone. A notification had popped up, a tag from an account she didn't recognize. With trembling fingers, she tapped it. It was the video from the mall. The influencer had edited it with upbeat, mocking music. The caption read, "Spotted, a walking tent in the wild. Circus tent #fashion fail, #big is not beautiful." The video already had thousands of views. Zina made the mistake of scrolling down to the comments. "How does she breathe in that much fabric?" one person wrote. "She's just lazy," another added. "If I looked like that, I wouldn't even leave the house." Each word felt like a physical blow. The fabric fortress hadn't worked. She had tried so hard to be invisible, yet here she was, being broadcast to the world as a joke. The walls of her car felt like they were closing in. She felt a hot, stinging tear roll down her cheek, followed by another. For years, she had told herself that if she just stayed quiet and stayed covered, she would be safe. But the world didn't want her safe, it wanted her gone. She couldn't stay in her apartment tonight. Every shadow felt like a person pointing a finger. Without thinking, she put the car back in gear and drove. She didn't have a destination until she saw the lights of the Great Suspension Bridge cutting through the midnight fog. The bridge was a masterpiece of steel and light, but to Zina, it felt like an edge. She parked her car at the foot of the walkway and stepped out. The midnight air was humid, sticking her heavy hoodie to her skin, but she didn't care anymore. She walked until she reached the highest point of the span. Below, the black water churned, indifferent and deep. Zina leaned against the cold railing. She looked at her reflection in the screen of her phone one last time before clicking it off. The world felt too loud, too mean, and far too small for someone like her. She felt like a puzzle piece from a completely different set, trying to force herself into a picture where she didn't belong. "I'm tired," she whispered into the wind. "I'm just so tired of hiding." She gripped the railing, her knuckles white. The city lights flickered in the distance, mocking her with their brightness. She felt a strange, hollow peace at the thought of finally letting go, of the hoodies, the comments, and the heavy skin she had grown to loathe. She closed her eyes, leaning her weight forward, ready to leave the mockery behind forever. Zina leaned her weight into the cold metal of the railing, her eyes squeezed shut. The roaring in her ears wasn't just the wind. It was the echoes of every laugh and every cruel comment she had ever endured. She was ready to let go of the fabric fortress, and the girl trapped inside it. "Excuse me," a calm, melodic voice drifted through the air. "Could you hold this for a second? My tripod is acting up in this wind." The voice was so ordinary, so matter-of-fact, that it snapped Zina's eyes open. She blinked, her vision blurred by tears and the fine mist of rain that had started to fall. Standing a few feet away was a man with a camera bag slung over his shoulder. He wasn't looking at her with pity or horror. In fact, he wasn't looking at her size at all. He was struggling with a large silver circular disc, a reflector. Zina froze, her hands still gripped tightly to the railing. I was. Just for a moment," he said, stepping closer. He had a kind, tired face and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. He didn't wait for her to agree. He simply placed the edge of the silver disc near her hand. "The moon is hitting the cables perfectly right now. If I lose this shot, I'll have to wait another month." Instinctively, Zina's fingers reached out to stabilize the disc. The cold metal of the bridge was replaced by the textured fabric of the reflector. It was a small physical task, but it grounded her. She felt the weight of it, the way it caught the wind, and suddenly she was back on the bridge, not over it. "There," the man whispered, clicking his shutter. "That's the one." He finally looked at her, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. "I'm Kale. I usually take photos of people, but tonight, the architecture felt more honest." Zina looked down at her baggy, rain-soaked hoodie, her face heating up. I'm not exactly a good subject for honesty." "Why do you say that?" Kale asked, packing his lens with practiced ease. "I spend my whole life trying to hide," she said, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. "People don't like what they see when they look at me. I'm just a joke to them." Kale leaned against the railing next to her, looking out at the water she had nearly jumped into. He didn't give a grand speech about how life was worth living or how she was beautiful. He just spoke softly. "People see what they are trained to see," Kale said. "A camera lens can be cruel, or it can be kind. It all depends on who is behind it. I've spent my life looking for the light in the shadows. And right now, the way the moonlight hits your eyes, that's a light most people would kill to capture." Zina looked at him, startled. No one had ever spoken to her like that. The heavy, dark trance that had pulled her to the edge was beginning to crack. For the first time in years, someone was looking at her, and they weren't laughing. "I'm Zina," she whispered. "Nice to meet you, Zina," Kale said, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "Would you like to see what I saw? My studio isn't far. I think you've spent enough time in the dark tonight." The walk back to the cars was silent, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence Zina was used to. It was a quietness filled with the sound of falling rain and the distant hum of the city. She followed Kale's taillights through the winding streets until they stopped at a converted warehouse. Inside, the studio smelled of roasted coffee and expensive paper. High ceilings and white walls were covered in framed photographs, but Kale bypassed them all, leading her to a large computer monitor in the corner. "Sit," he said gently, pulling out a stool. Zina hesitated, her damp hoodie feeling like a lead weight. "Kale, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't look good in photos. I'm the girl people use before pictures, or worse, for laughs." Kale didn't argue. He just plugged his camera into the dock. "Just look, Zina. No judgment, just observation." He clicked through a few shots of the bridge cables before arriving at the first image of her. Zina instinctively flinched, expecting to see the walking tent from the viral video. But the image on the screen made her breath hitch. It was a raw, unedited shot. The rain had matted her hair against her forehead, and her oversized hoodie was dark with moisture. But Kale had captured her in the exact moment she had reached for the reflector. The silver light from the disc was bouncing upward, illuminating the soft curve of her cheek and the deep, soulful brown of her eyes. There was a vulnerability there, a haunting sort of grace that looked like a painting. "Who is that?" she whispered, leaning closer to the screen. That's you, Kale said, his voice steady. No, Zina shook her head, her voice trembling. That girl she looks like she has a story. She looks like someone you'd want to know. I just look like a mess. Kale scrolled to the next photo. In this one, she was looking out at the water, her profile silhouetted against the city lights. The baggy fabric of her clothes didn't look like a hideout. It looked like draped velvet in the moonlight. Her jawline was strong, and there was a tragic beauty in her expression that was breathtaking. You see a mess because that's what you've been told to see, Kale said, pointing to the screen. I see light, shadow, and soul. I see a woman who is carrying a lot of weight, not on her body, but in her heart. And despite that, she is still standing. For the first time in her life, Zina didn't look away from her own image. She stared at the beautiful stranger on the screen, realizing with a shock that the nose, the lips, and those eyes were hers. The mockery of them all felt miles away. In this quiet studio, under the glow of the monitor, the reality she had lived in for years began to shift. I've spent so much time hating what I am, she whispered, a single tear falling, not out of sadness, but out of recognition. I never realized I was even in there. You're in there, Kale said softly. And I think it's time we let her out. Zina stared at the monitor until the screensaver flickered on, plunging the room into soft darkness. The image of the beautiful stranger stayed burned into her mind. For the first time, the heavy silence of the studio didn't feel like a place to hide, but a place to begin. Kale turned his chair toward her, his expression serious but kind. Zina, those photos prove that the camera doesn't lie, but your mind does. I want to make a deal with you. A self-love week. 7 days where we retrain your brain. Zina pulled at the damp sleeves of her hoodie. I don't know if I can change how I feel in a week, Kale. We start with the language, Kale said firmly. Rule number 1. The word fat is officially banned as an insult. It's just a descriptor like tall or short. From this moment on, you are forbidden from using it to beat yourself up. No more calling yourself a mess, a tent, or an eyesore. If you can't say it to a friend, you can't say it to yourself. Zina bit her lip. That's going to be the hardest part. That's why we're going to practice in public, he replied with a wink. The next afternoon, Kale took her to a part of the city she usually avoided, a trendy district filled with soul-inspired aesthetic cafes. The shops were painted in soft pastels, filled with cherry blossom decor and floor-to-ceiling windows. Usually, Zina would have felt like a blot of ink on a clean white page, but Kale walked beside her with such ease that she found herself matching his pace. They sat in a sun-drenched corner of a cafe called The Bloom. The furniture was delicate, and the walls were lined with mirrors. Zina instinctively tried to sit in a way that made her look smaller, tucking her arms in and hunching her shoulders. Stop, Kale said softly, placing a steaming matcha latte in front of her. Take up space, Zina. You paid for your seat just like everyone else. Your presence in this room isn't a burden. It's a part of the atmosphere. He leaned back, watching her. Look at the people here. They aren't looking at you with judgment. They're just living. The only person holding a magnifying glass over your flaws is you. Throughout the week, they visited more places, minimalist galleries and quiet gardens. Every time Zina started to whisper an apology for her size or tried to hide behind a menu, Kale would gently remind her of the ban. He made her look into the cafe mirrors and identify one thing she liked: the glow of her skin, the neatness of her eyeliner, or the way she laughed at his jokes. By the end of the week, Zina noticed something strange. She was still the same size, but the fabric fortress felt a little lighter. She wasn't invisible, but she wasn't a joke either. She was just Zina, a woman having coffee in a beautiful place, and for the first time, she felt like she actually belonged in the frame. The morning after Self-Love Week ended, Zina stood in her bedroom and looked at the pile of gray and black hoodies on her floor. For the first time, they didn't look like safety. They looked like bandages covering a wound that was finally starting to heal. No more hiding, she whispered, her voice shaking. She called Kale, who introduced her to Elena, a stylist known for creating bold, structural pieces for women of all sizes. Walking into Elena's studio was different from the mall. There were no harsh fluorescent lights or judgmental teenagers. Instead, the air smelled of silk and cedar, and the racks were filled with vibrant jewel tones. I've spent my life trying to look like a shadow, Zina told Elena, her hands trembling as she touched a roll of fabric. I don't even know what I like. Elena smiled, her eyes scanning Zina's proportions with professional appreciation. You have a classic hourglass frame and skin that was made for rich colors. Let's stop trying to disappear and start trying to arrive. Elena pulled a garment from a hidden rack. It was a wrap dress made of deep yellow silk. The fabric felt cool and heavy like liquid light. Zina took it into the fitting room, her heart hammering against her ribs. For years, she had worn clothes that were designed to hang off her, never to touch her. The idea of something hugging her skin felt like exposing a secret. She stepped into the dress. The silk slid over her curves, and she tied the sash around her waist, defining her silhouette for the first time in a decade. She stood before the full-length mirror, her hand over her mouth. The dress didn't hide her size. It celebrated it. The V-neckline elongated her torso, and the rich green made her skin look like polished bronze. She wasn't a walking tent anymore. She was a woman with a shape, bold, solid, and undeniably beautiful. When she stepped out of the fitting room, Cale and Elena both went silent. Cale didn't say a word at first. He just looked at her with an expression of pure, quiet awe. "Zina," he finally said, his voice low. "You look incredible." "I feel terrified," she admitted, looking at her reflection. She felt exposed, as if the green silk was shouting to the world that she was here. But as she took a breath, she felt the strength of the fabric. It didn't pinch or pull. It supported her. "You look powerful," Elena corrected, adjusting the collar. "And power is always a little terrifying at first." Zina looked at herself again. She saw the soft curve of her hips and the strength in her shoulders. She wasn't shrinking. She was standing tall. The fabric fortress had finally been breached not by force, but by a single, perfectly placed stitch. The yellow dress felt like a second skin as Zina walked beside Cale through the open-air plaza. For the first time, she wasn't looking at the floor tiles. She was looking at the tops of the trees and the faces of people passing by. The fear was still there, a small hum in the back of her mind, but it was being drowned out by the rhythmic swish of silk against her legs. "You're walking differently," Cale noted, a hint of pride in his voice. "Your chin is parallel to the ground." "It's hard to look down when you're not trying to disappear," Zina replied, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. "But the universe has a way of testing a person's newfound strength." As they rounded the corner toward a fountain, a familiar, sharp laugh cut through the air. Zina's blood went cold. Standing by the water was the same group of influencers from the mall. The boy with the phone, the one who had posted the viral video, was there, leaning against a railing. They noticed her almost instantly. The group went quiet for a heartbeat, squinting as if trying to place the elegant woman in the vibrant green dress. Then recognition clicked. "Wait, is that?" The boy started, reaching for his pocket. "No way." The tent found a tailor. He pulled out his phone, holding it up like a weapon, ready to record another joke for his followers. His friends began to snicker, the old, familiar mockery bubbling up. "Hey, look at that. It thinks it's a model now. Give us a spin, big girl. Let's see if that silk can handle the pressure." In the past, Zina would have felt her throat tighten. She would have tucked her chin into her chest and sprinted for the nearest exit. But today, the weight of the emerald silk felt like armor. Cale stepped back slightly. He didn't jump in to save her or shout them down. He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder for just a second, a silent signal that said, "I'm here, but this is your stage." Zina stopped walking. She didn't hide. She turned her full body toward the boy with the phone and looked him directly in the eyes. "Put the phone down," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was incredibly steady. The boy blinked, caught off guard by her directness. "What? I'm just making content." "You're making a fool of yourself," Zina interrupted. "For months, I let people like you tell me what I was worth. I let your comments decide when I could leave my house and what I should wear. But the only thing big about this situation is how small your life must be if you have to spend it laughing at strangers to feel important." The group went silent. The boy's hand wavered, and he slowly lowered the phone. The onlookers who had gathered weren't laughing with him this time. They were looking at him with disdain. "I'm not a joke, and I'm not a tent," Zina continued, her voice gaining strength. "I am a woman, an artist, and I am far more than a silhouette for your feed. Don't ever record me again." She didn't wait for an apology. She didn't need one. She turned back to Cale, her heart hammering, not with fear, but with the rush of victory. "Shall we?" she asked. Cale smiled, his eyes beaming. "After you, Zina." As they walked away, Zina realized she hadn't just stood up to a bully. She had finally stood up for herself. The echoes of the past were still there, but they were finally being drowned out by the sound of her own voice. The adrenaline from the confrontation at the fountain didn't fade when Zina got home. It transformed. For years, her art had been a secret, a collection of beautiful women she wished she could be. But that night, she sat at her digital tablet and did something different. She didn't draw a fantasy. She drew herself. She started a series titled The Heavy Heart Made Light. The first piece was a self-portrait in that charcoal gray hoodie. In the drawing, the fabric wasn't just cloth. It was made of interlocking lead chains, heavy and suffocating. But at the chest, a single green silk thread was beginning to unravel the metal. She worked through the night, the stylus moving across the screen with a precision she had never felt before. As the days passed, the series grew. She illustrated the bridge, the rain, and the moment the silver reflector caught the light. She drew the cruelty of the phone screens and the quiet dignity of the emerald dress. She didn't airbrush her curves or hide her size in the art. She drew the strength in her arms and the softness of her expression. She realized that her body wasn't a problem to be solved. It was the vessel that had carried her through every storm. Cale stopped by her studio midweek, bringing coffee. He stood silently behind her, looking at the latest piece on her screen. A woman standing tall, her shadow transforming into a flock of birds taking flight. "This is breathtaking, Zina," he whispered. "It's so raw. It's so you." Zina set her stylus down and looked at him. For a long time, she had viewed Cale as her rescuer, the man who had pulled her back from the edge of the bridge and shown her a different world. She had felt a heavy debt to him, believing he was the source of her new strength. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think you saved me that night. I thought you were the one who changed everything." Cale started to speak, but she held up a hand. "But looking at these drawings, I realize you didn't save me, Cale. You couldn't. No one can actually do that for someone else." She gestured to the vibrant colors on her screen. "You just handed me the map. You showed me where the path was, but I'm the one who had to walk it. I'm the one who chose to stand up. I'm the one who chose to put on the dress." Cale smiled, and for the first time there was no teacher or mentor in his gaze, only an equal. "I was wondering when you'd realize that. I didn't create the light in those photos, Zina. I just pointed the camera at it. You were always the one glowing." A profound sense of peace settled over her. She loved Cale's kindness, but she didn't need it to survive anymore. She was no longer a project or a victim. She was an artist who had found her voice, and she was finally ready to share it with the world. The piece Zina found in her studio became the foundation for the most ambitious month of her life. As the final piece of The Heavy Heart Made Light was digitized and framed, the news of her exhibition began to swirl. The girl who once hid in the back of art supply stores was now the headline of a high-end gallery opening. The night of the exhibition, the gallery was a vision of glass and white marble. The elite of the art world, local socialites, and even a few skeptical faces from her past gathered under the glowing track lights. The walls were lined with Zina's journey, the chains, the silk threads, and the final, triumphant portraits of a woman who had stopped apologizing for her existence. Outside, a sleek car pulled to the curb. Zina took a breath, feeling the weight of her choice. This time, there was no hoodie. She was wearing a custom-tailored, midnight blue velvet gown. The fabric was rich and deep, catching the light like the evening sky. It hugged her waist and flowed into a dramatic train, framing her curves with an elegance that was undeniable. Her hair was swept up, exposing the graceful line of her neck, and her skin glowed with a radiance that no highlighter could mimic. As she stepped through the gallery doors, the shift in the room was physical. The low hum of chatter didn't just fade, it vanished. Heads turned in unison. It wasn't the hurried, mocking glance of people looking at a joke. It was the stunned, heavy silence that follows a revelation. Zina walked into the center of the room, her movements fluid and steady. She didn't look for a corner to disappear into. She stood in the light. The wow factor was instant and visceral. People who had known her for years leaned in, whispering, "Is that really Zina?" But it wasn't just the dress or the velvet. It was her aura, a quiet, unshakable confidence that commanded the space around her. She looked like a queen reclaiming a throne she had forgotten was hers. Cale was standing near the center of the room, leaning against a pillar. He didn't approach her immediately. He just watched with a grin of pure satisfaction. He saw the way the crowd parted for her, not out of fear, but out of genuine respect. One of the influencers from the mall was there, having squeezed onto the guest list. He stood near the buffet, his phone half raised in a habit, but he didn't hit record. He just stared, his mouth slightly open. The girl he had filmed weeks ago was gone. In her place was a woman so grounded and so beautiful that his mockery felt suddenly childish, even to him. Zina caught his eye, gave a polite, distant nod, and turned toward her art. She didn't need his reaction to feel beautiful. The silence of the room was the greatest applause she had ever heard. For the first time, the world wasn't looking at her size. They were looking up at her stature. The success of the exhibition didn't just change Zina's career. It changed the very air she breathed. The velvet gown was eventually tucked away, but the woman who wore it remained. Months later, Zina's life had found a new, beautiful rhythm. She was no longer a shadow in the corner of a cafe. She was a woman who walked into rooms with her head held high, her wardrobe now a vibrant collection of colors that reflected her mood rather than her fear. Her relationship with Kale had grown into something steady and deep. They were partners in the truest sense, often seen together at galleries or quiet parks. Kale with his camera and Zina with her sketchbook. But the most important relationship in her life was the one she had fostered with herself. Every morning, she stood before the mirror, and instead of searching for flaws to hide, she looked into her own eyes and smiled. She was finally in love with the woman staring back. One humid afternoon, Zina returned to the same art supply store where she had once been mocked. As she reached for a set of professional oil paints, she noticed a girl, barely 14, standing in the back aisle. The girl was wearing a thick, oversized navy blue sweatshirt despite the heat. She was hunched over, her shoulders pulled in tight, trying to make herself a ghost among the shelves. Zina saw her own past reflected in that heavy cotton fabric. She saw the fear, the sweat, and the crushing weight of wanting to disappear. Slowly, Zina walked over. She didn't offer a look of pity. She offered a look of recognition. "That's a great set of pencils," Zina said softly, nodding toward the box in the girl's hand. The girl flinched, pulling her sleeves over her knuckles. "Oh, thanks. I like to draw." "I do too," Zina smiled, leaning against the shelf with a relaxed grace. "But it's hard to draw the world clearly when you're trying so hard to hide from it. I used to wear sweaters just like that one. I thought they were my armor." The girl looked up, her eyes wide as she took in Zina. Her stylish, fitted wrap top, her glowing skin, and the effortless way she occupied the space around her. "You did." "I did," Zina said. "Until I realized that the people who wanted me to hide didn't deserve my silence. You have a lot of light in you, I can see it. Don't let a bit of fabric put it out." Zina reached into her bag and handed the girl a small card. An invitation to a youth workshop she was hosting at the gallery. "If you ever want to learn how to turn that armor into art, come find me. My name is Zina." As Zina walked toward the checkout, she felt a light breeze from the automatic doors. She didn't look back to see if the girl had taken off the sweater. She knew that journey took time. But as she caught her reflection in the glass door, she didn't see a plus-size lady or a victim. She saw a masterpiece in progress. Zina stepped out into the sun, her heart light, her path clear, and her silhouette finally, perfectly her own. Zina's journey reminds us that the most important opinion in the world isn't the one left in a comment section. It's the one we hold of ourselves. We often build fortresses out of fear, but true safety comes from finally stepping into the light. Zina stopped waiting for the world to be kind and decided to be kind to herself first. And once she did, the world had no choice but to look up. Thank you for watching this episode on Folktale Bestie. If Zina's story touched your heart today, please leave a heart in the comments and share this with someone who needs to hear that they are a masterpiece exactly as they are. Don't forget to subscribe for more life-changing stories. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of the space you occupy. Goodbye for now.